Life and death, it's the flip side of a coin, but it's a necessary part of everyday life for so many people that we ignore and we don't look at. However, there can be great power in getting close to and confronting your own mortality.
Hello, John Christian.
Hi, Julie. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad that you're here, and I feel so honored to know you and to have gotten to meet you several years ago at this point. And whenever I get to see you, it's always these magical surprise moments. And having you on the podcast today is going to be a really special and beautiful conversation.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. And you're right. Life is full of magical moments. And every time we cross paths, there's something new and fresh and alive and purposeful that we tend to delve into. And I'm glad to be here to do that with you again so that we can share it with others.
Yes. So we're going to dive into a lot today. I first want to just chat just a little bit and we'll get back to it. But Larkspur. And what is that? And how are you involved in this amazing thing that is Larkspur?
Larkspur Conservation it's a very unique thing. And I'm going to tell you about it. And for our listeners, I think that it's something that will sound completely different and unusual, and that's okay. And we'll get into why things that like this are unusual and different later on. But Larkspur Conservation is a nonprofit organization that I founded with Becca Stevens in 2013 with the sole goal of creating a nature preserve and conserving land through a revival of natural burial practices. So on this nature preserve, we actually commit our loved ones' bodies to the ground in a very environmentally friendly fashion that enables our bodies and our organic matter to return to the soil and come back in the form of other plants and animals, habitat and pollinator. If you can imagine, you go on a hike, I've seen you at Radnor Lake and different places before. Imagine being a part of letting your body or your shell, as I often refer to it, be a part of something bigger and using it as a tool to save land for your community. Nashville's growing, it's getting bigger and bigger every day. And we're losing a lot of habitat for our native plant and animal species. We're losing space for our communities to be able to get out in these beautiful, pristine nature areas and natural areas. So for us, Larkspur Conservation is creating this nature preserve for wildlife and our plant and animal species. It's creating a community green space for folks that want to go for a walk and a hike, do some nature study or bird watching. And it's creating a very, very beautiful and meaningful repository or space for stories and honoring those that we love in a very mindful and meaningful way. We're incredibly proud of this nonprofit and what we've been able to achieve since starting in 2013 and opening our first nature preserve in 2018. So I'm just so excited to share about natural burial and what we do at Larkspur.
And I want to talk more about natural burial in a little while, just because I think that can be. It's so weird to me that can feel taboo for people when for centuries that was the way that we were put back into the earth. And now we're so used to cremation and just coffin burials that, embalmment that you're just, what? Someone's just going to go in the ground. And it's like, well, I mean, how do you think we kind of did this for centuries? But before we get to that, the other thing that someone may be wondering that listens to this podcast all the time, they're like, Julie, you talk about business growth and marketing and influence. Like, why are we sitting here talking about death and burial? But something that I think is really this question that I've had over the last couple of years, because in the last year I've lost my grandmother and I lost my dog, who was a very important person in my life. And there was this idea of, how does death influence life? And because we talk about influence and what it means to influence and to have influence and to share influence and to give influence on this podcast, I thought that that would be a really interesting question for you to answer. So how do you think death influences life and the way that we live?
Well, I think that's a really great question that you pose. And life and death, it's the flip side of a coin, if you will, but it's a necessary part of everyday life for so many people that we ignore and we don't look at. We don't want to flip that coin over and look at the other side. We want to ignore that it's even there. We want to have all sunny days, and we don't want to even consider what a cloudy day may look like. However, there can be great power in getting close to and confronting your own mortality. And it can make you a better person, a better spouse, a better parent, a better child. It can make you have a better relationship with yourself. Like when I get up in the morning, sure, I have these days where I'm just like, oh my gosh, if I could just stay in bed just a little bit longer. I mean, we're always going to have those days. But working so closely with death and with families who are on a regular basis experiencing loss, what I'm able to do is take a little bit of what I see in them as they work through this experience and apply that back to my life in a way that I can prepare myself, but also not take for granted this incredible gift and this incredible opportunity that we have in the right here, right now.
Yeah. So what I really think about is that it just brings you back to that presence moment and really honoring that. And how has just being around, it is your career, it is your life's mission to not only get out this amazing work that you do, but I'm sure there's a lot of personalities and feelings and emotions that you have to deal with day in and day out that probably most people don't deal with in their normal work dynamic. And so how does that really influence and shape how you see and view the world?
Death can be a roller coaster. Last year, I lost my dog of 16 years and I lost my grandmother of 94. And, I had a harder time with the death of my dog than I did of my grandmother. And I was I thought, goodness gracious, man, get yourself together. It hit me differently. And I don't know what that is. Death and loss and grief, it's like a fingerprint. Everyone has their own journey and their own unique circumstance and their own relationship, both to the experience, but also to the person or the beloved companion animal or whatever it could be the death of. I think that when I meet with a family and, it's for someone who died by suicide and that person was young, there's a lot of heaviness and weight in that. But I think that there's also an opportunity for me to learn in those moments how, again, to be a better human, not only by considering what this person might have gone through, but also seeing what their family's going through and learning from their family as they move and navigate this type of loss. Now, the same can be said for someone who has experienced the death of a matriarch of a family at 94 years old. When you have a gathering time to honor this person and you can look back on 94 years of life and you can recall all of these amazing moments, almost like it was the most epic film you ever watched, and you get to come to the closing credits and be a part of that. That's beautiful too. But this short story or this short film also has some very key moments in it, like when we lose a young person that are extremely powerful and can be applied. I don't have all the answers. I'm still working it out. I don't think that anybody can ever be an expert on something as mysterious as death, because it's a room away from where we are, and we've never visited that room. Even if you may have heard of someone that has had near-death experience. Those are experiences that people have, and I do not discount those at all. But again, like the fingerprint, everyone's experience is different. So I can never say this is what yours will be like, or this is what it's going to be like exactly for you. And I never, ever, ever say I understand what you're going through. Like when I saw you earlier this year and we talked about losing our dogs, I never said, oh, I know exactly what you're going through, because I don't. That was your relationship. That was your little buddy, and I had mine too. So I try just to really be open to the idea of wonder in every moment when it comes to death and loss, and working through the process and the journey with families. And then I take all of these little key moments that I have along the way, these little, as Oprah would say, aha moments, and I make a little note in my Rolodex, in my noggin, and I file that away. And I try to use that the next time I have a family that is going through that similar journey or walking a path that's somewhat parallel. How can I apply what I've learned there to make it a little easier and a little more clear a path for this particular family? In considering all of this and getting close to death, what am I doing? I'm creating a better opportunity for an experience for myself in dealing with my own mortality and the mortality of those around me.
Mm. And what would you say to those like myself who I don't like death. I don't like thinking about it. I don't like talking about it, which is why I wanted you to be here, because I myself, I know since I don't like it, I need to go there. It's usually like what we resist.
Right. Right.
And so what would you say to people that, if you're afraid of it, if you try to avoid it or hide it, or if you, whatever the emotions or the feelings are around that, how can we kind of get to this place to just, I think the word acceptance comes in for me. Doesn't mean that you have to like it, but how can we just start accepting life on life's terms, which means there is going to be, a finale in this day, and how can we really use that to honor the moments that we do have?
Well, I think in today's on-demand world, when everything's at our fingertips, we can instantly have a pizza at our door in no time, or we can order something and have it delivered immediately almost. I think that we have gotten away from understanding that things just happen in our lives that are outside of our control. And that's a big word, control. We try to physically and mentally control everything in our lives, when sometimes what we need to do is just let go. And in the letting go, it's kind of like they're training a baby to swim, and the baby rolls over on its back, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh. At first it's all of this movement, and then, oh my gosh, okay, I'm here, I'm experiencing this, and they float, and they understand that they're going to float, and they can be in this water that's uncertain, and this movement that's happening. But really leaning in and being in the moment and letting go is probably my biggest tip for someone that's scared. I have a lot of friends that when we talk, they're like, please, let's not talk about Larkspur. I don't want to talk about Larkspur. Oh my gosh, don't talk to me about that. And it's really uncomfortable for them. But then I have some friends, it's all they want to talk about. And this is for a lot of folks. They've watched too many movies, too many Netflix mysteries on TV. We've also just, we've grown up in a culture where nobody talks about this around the dinner table. And the avoidance really gets us in a pickle, where it's something that's so foreign to us that we can't imagine. It's almost like asking someone to eat a frog. Here, eat this frog. Oh my gosh, I've never ate a frog. What's it going to be like? I'm scared. I don't want to eat it. The things that we avoid so much, and the things that are so foreign, they're just very difficult. And I think, I said frog. I should have said something like sushi, because nobody actually eats a frog. Nobody wants to eat a frog, but I should have said sushi for somebody that's never had sushi. Like, oh my gosh, no, I'm not eating raw fish. Oh my gosh, this is actually much different than what I expected. I'd built something up in my head, and it's totally different. And that could go with any strange food, but to get away from, this is not a diet show. Let's get away from the food. And when we're talking, especially when we're talking about death, for people just to have that conversation. It may be, sometimes it's a conversation that starts really, really small. I have a lot of people that I'll meet with. Maybe it's just one person and their husband isn't there or their kids aren't there, but they're the ones that have taken up the mantle for the family to make a plan and figure this out so that their family doesn't have to go through the unknowns of figuring out what to do when someone dies. So let's just say I'm sitting with this lady and she's telling me that her husband didn't want to come. He doesn't like to talk about this kind of stuff. And this is probably going to freak my kids out. They don't like to talk about death. They don't like the idea of me being gone. And of course, those are all normal reactions. And she says, how do I even talk to them about this? How do I bridge this gap in communication? And sometimes one of the easiest things for me to pass along to folks, and I don't know if you like music like I do, sometimes I'll catch myself in a car on a road trip with family or friends, and we're listening to the radio, or maybe we've made a playlist and there's certain songs that come on. And I don't know if you've ever played this game or if you've ever had this thought, but occasionally a song will come on the radio and you're like, oh my God, I love this song. And it may be a song that you want played at your funeral or that you would consider having played at your funeral. And if you're trying to have a conversation with someone in that car while you're riding along about death, just say it. Say, oh my gosh, I love this song so much. Don't you? You're like, yes, I love this song. It's so sweet. It makes me think of you, Mom. Will you play it at my funeral? That's a segue moment. And there's a lot of those. It can be with flowers. It can be with music. It can be with people. It can be with food. There's a lot of very common things in our lives that we can tie into what you want when death occurs. You know, I love to play the game with friends. If you could have anyone in the world, living or dead, perform a song at your funeral, who would it be and what's the song? And that really gets, and I mean, I do not have an answer for that question, and I don't expect you or anybody else to. Some people may, but there's just little ways that we can gently, nudge up against somebody and have these conversations without going, I'm going to die and this is what I want to do. You're going to put me in this red velvet sweater and it's in the closet. There's a list. It tells you everything to do. Like, that's not fun. Nobody wants to hear that. But let's talk about Bryan Adams and your favorite song and what we're playing at the funeral. Now, I can get into that. There's
Number
just
69. Let's go.
I mean, come on. So there's just a lot of different little ways that you can, and that's the most common thing that I give people to kind of break the ice on having the conversation about death and loss and navigating that. Some people may open up to you and be very into the idea about, oh, I'm getting all my plans in order so that if anything happens before I go on this trip to Europe for a month, you kids know exactly where everything in my house is, and it can be easy like that, right? You know, and those are all very important things that we should do as adults and as people that have people that we care for, that we're leaving things behind for, and sometimes we're leaving things behind for them, and sometimes we leave a mess when we don't have this conversation and we don't plan.
Oh, that's a great point. And I think it allows us to honor our loved ones more. I mean, you never know unless you start the conversation. Like, my grandmother was 92 years old and she was a Pentecostal believer, and she could not wait to go see Jesus. It's all she talked about. I mean, she had her everything picked out, her outfit, the song she wanted to play. Like, she could not be more excited to jump in that coffin and like go off to her, to her ride. And it's what she believed and loved to believe and prepared for. And it was like this whole thing, which if we would have never had that conversation with her, we would have never even known what her wishes were. And so I do think that is a really beautiful reminder. And I love the question that you posed about the song, or which artist would you love to play there? And I think that it can allow us to, I guess, break the ice sometimes if it's a complicated subject. And, and when it comes to that, with even realizing that there's so many different options and ways for you to, have your, your send off and your next steps or whatever that may be. And that's really where Larkspur comes in. Like, I love to talk about it. I think that I find it so incredible. It's, if anyone, please, and we're going to add this in the handle, we'll mention it, but please go to their Instagram. I cannot tell you how absolutely beautiful the ceremonies are and the way that they hold space, and just how light and just, I mean, I'm just in awe when I see pictures of how you hold space there, and the ceremonies that you are able to do for these incredible people and, you know,
Oh,
their
thank
loved
you.
ones. And it's just amazing.
It's so important to us. It really
It
is.
truly is remarkable. So share with us a little bit more about Larkspur and what made you decide, because that's the thing, we talk a lot about entrepreneurship here on this podcast. And it's so funny to me because people will come to me and be like, okay, Julie, so I have this idea, but I don't know. It's so different. It's so unique. I don't know if it could work. And I'm like, well, my friend John Christian has like a natural burial conservatory. So if that can work, then I think anything can work. So
Yeah.
just share with us a little bit about what made you want to get into this line of business, what gave you the idea of doing it the way that you do it, which is just so beautiful and unique. And what have you really learned throughout your journey of entrepreneurship and having just this really unique business and business model, really?
Well, I tell you, I was probably 5 or 6 years old when I started burying grasshoppers and crickets wrapped in leaves. I would sneak into my mom's kitchen drawer. I grew up on a small farm in West Tennessee, and I would grab a fork and I would go out to the edge of the woods. We had 3 channels, so I was outside all the time. We didn't have channels that were fun either, like MTV or anything. They were all just like boring, playing Days of Our Lives and all of the soap operas. But the days of my life were spent as a child outside with Mother Nature as my babysitter. And I just loved it. And I fell in love with nature and the natural world. And, you know, I would come across these little insects and little creatures and different things. And it was the first time, I guess, as a child that I'd been so close to something that was always jumping or getting away or running away, right? So I was able to just look at it and admire this beautiful creation, the way it was just this masterpiece, if you will, of design. And for me, I was like, well, I can't just walk by it and just be like, oh, okay, take it for granted. So as a child, I made this sacred little spot in the woods for these little animals and these little insects, and I buried them there with a fork from Mom's kitchen drawer. And I had a little ceremony, and I was really young. I think I'd only ever seen anything regarding funerals, probably on TV in an old movie, or I think I'd seen Old Yeller. If you like to cry, watch Old Yeller. If you don't like to cry, don't watch it. But we pick up on so much stuff that we don't realize from like television or the culture around us. But for me, honoring life was something that was so important from a very, very young age. And I told my parents in 7th grade I wanted to be a mortician. And that was, I think, over dinner. Randomly, they were like, okay, you can be whatever you want to be when you grow up. They were probably thinking this will pass, tomorrow it'll be I always did want to be a botanist, a park ranger. There was the mortician. And in high school, I was like, oh, I'm going to go to university with all my friends. But right after high school, my grandfather died, and I experienced loss in a different way. It wasn't a grasshopper. It wasn't a cricket. It was someone that played a huge role in my life and in my family's life. So to be able to honor him or watch him be honored, and see how my family interacted through that loss. He was 92 when he died. It was something that snapped me back onto my path, if you will, of serving and helping people navigate end of life. And I went into mortuary college, went through that process and learned so much. I spent 15 years in the conventional funeral industry. I managed a large funeral home here in Nashville. Before that, I was, I lived in the funeral home in my hometown. I just, from small hometown to large metropolitan cities, to funerals for homeless people, to funerals for famous people at the Ryman Auditorium in downtown Nashville that are on national TV. I mean, you really get to see a lot. And we were helping people, but I kind of always thought in my mind, I said, I always looked for the next way that I could help more, that I could help better. So I gotten to this point where I had done so much, and I was 35 at the time, and I made a leap of faith. I thought there has to be a way for us to do something that's more mindful, more family focused, more ritual focused, something that takes into consider our natural world. Natural burial, green burial, if you will, is something that was always appealing to me because of my roots and where I come from. To just make that leap of faith and open myself up to making space for something new to come into it. It was literally 3 months after I traveled around the country talking to people about their end of life wishes and wants, what they hated, what they loved, what they wanted for themselves, and trying to debug my programming from more of a conventional, this is the way you do it inside of these parameters. I was trying to get rid of all of that. So 3 months after making this space, I get a call from Becca Stevens, who I'd had a funeral with before in the past. And she said, I understand you have dreams and desires regarding green burial, natural burial, end of life practices. She said, let's talk. And that's how it started. And here we are almost 10 years later, and it's just quite incredible to see how it's all unfolded. But I think that anybody can do anything that they want as long as they're willing to step towards it and open up and create space for it, whether that's the next app or the next natural burial ground. You can really do it. And if you put your heart into it, you surround yourself with people that are positive all the time and can really give you the support that you need when you're navigating through. And that's kind of what I try to do for people that are navigating loss and trying to understand end of life. Try to be that support for them.
So good. And again, I can't stress enough how, for everyone listening, just if you're curious, if you're excited, if you're like, what does this even look like? Go and take a look at their website. Also has a lot of information and photos, but just the Instagram I love. Like whenever I just need to feel peace and serenity, I'll just scroll through, and it just gives me that like, it's all good.
It definitely is completely different. It's as if you were, like, if I were to say, imagine a funeral, imagine a cemetery. If I were to give you that and say, dig into that, and what can you find, or what comes to mind? Larkspur is the exact opposite of that completely.
So another thing that you were able to step into, create, receive, on top of all of the other incredible gifts that you have and what you do, is the documentary. So I would love if you would share a little bit about how this documentary came about. How were you able to get it off the floor? I mean, I can't tell you how many people that listen to this podcast have said to me, I want to create a documentary about the agriculture industry, or I want to create a documentary about this, but I don't even know the first steps of how to do it. So I would love just to hear the story of how this was created and how you were able to really bring this to life and then get it picked up and get it out in the world.
I can't imagine looking back now at the beginning of where we are as an organization, and the fact that there's a documentary film that's tracked the past 7 years of my life is quite baffling. I would have never imagined that would have happened. But I guess it was 2 years into my creating Larkspur. Larkspur's a nonprofit. We were very small. There was a lot of grassroots work that had to happen. I actually took a part-time, or actually a full-time job, helping a friend create a retail business. And during that time, I was working in that shop, and man and his wife came in, and they were just browsing around, and I wandered over and I said hello, and we began talking about a book, a Dorothea Lange book to be exact. They were really into photography. I learned he was a filmmaker. They had just moved to Nashville. I was the first person that they had officially met in their move into Nashville, and it kind of went that way. His name was Orion, and her name was Rebecca, Orion Paul and Rebecca Paul. And a few weeks after that first encounter in the shop, I was at the Urban Cowboy with Lion, who's the proprietor there. And he had purchased this. It was before the Urban Cowboy was the Urban Cowboy, which is a really amazing bed and breakfast and restaurant space in East Nashville. But I visited there, and they had a taco night, and they were going to tell everybody, show this house to everyone, this old mansion, and tell everyone about what their plans were for creating the Urban Cowboy Hotel in Nashville. So I went, and we had tacos, and in one of the, there's all these different hallways and corridors there, and there was Orion and Rebecca, and we got to talking, and we talked more and more and continued the conversation. They had no idea up until this point what I actually did. They thought I was just some guy that worked in a shop that was super nice and talked to them about Dorothea Lange. But normally I'm kind of guarded about who I tell what I do, because sometimes if you're on an airplane, if you open that up, you never know where someone is in their journey. First off, you might not want to talk to this person, but they could also be have recently experienced a loss, and you don't want to bring that up on a vacation trip or whatever else unless they instigate it. So I told Rebecca and Orion what I did and what my nonprofit was, and Orion immediately said, "Oh my gosh, I would love to make a documentary about this." And after that encounter, he emailed, and we began filming just casually. He just was following me around everywhere, going to the bank, going to the nature preserve. And it was literally 5, 6, 7 years before he had created a small short that was probably about 20 minutes long or so. And it went in the Nashville Film Festival and did really well. It went around, it won Best Tennessee Short and went around several festivals in the country. But he sent it into PBS through a contact at the Ouray International Film Festival in Ouray, Colorado. And PBS fell in love with it. And they said, "We need more John Christian. Like, we want to offer you the opportunity to produce this and present it with us in partnership for PBS viewers across the country and around the world." That was wild, because we had a 20 some odd minute documentary that I had nothing to do with other than running my mouth like I am now and just saying, "Come on, follow me. Let's go on an adventure," And Orion did, and in that moment, PBS said, "Well, you are either going to have to cut it down to this time frame, or you're going to have to increase it to 55 minutes." And Orion chose to increase it to 55 minutes, and we had to do some more filming. And that's how the closing scenes of the film actually came to be. I'm not going to give anything away, but folks can watch it, and that's the penultimate moment in the film, and it really brings everything together. But yeah, that process was just unreal, the way it happened and unfolded. And he never even thought, this is going to go to PBS. It's going to be a big thing. He had sat on the footage, and his wife Rebecca said, "You really should do something with that footage, all the footage that you took of John Christian." And that's really what started it all. So it's just been amazing. So right now you can watch the film if you're a PBS subscriber and you have the Passport app, you can watch it there, or you can rent it on Amazon or on iTunes. And it's called Bury Me at Taylor Hollow.
Yes, Bury Me at Taylor Hollow. And it premiered, was it last year or has it been 2
It
years?
premiered last spring.
What I thought.
April. Oh, yeah, this past spring, April. I'm like, what year is it? Last April. You lose track of time when you're always in the now. I'm such a dork. But it premiered last April. And we've had a great response from people across the country, and in Canada, and even some from overseas that have watched the film. So it's just been amazing. And we have really been able to help a lot of people because of this film. Yeah. A lot of people that are in difficult situations or find themselves in those situations. And yeah, it's been amazing.
Yeah, and so for those, we'll make sure to add a link down to where you can rent it here in the show notes, because it really is truly an incredible piece of art, and the story is amazing. And I mean, who wouldn't want more of John Christian? I'll take it all day long. I'll take all day long.
I don't know.
But for those who do and who want to dive in more, can you just share where people can find you on social media and of course your website?
Absolutely. So you can find me on social media at Natural Burial, and my personal Instagram is John Christian Phifer. Also on the Book of Faces for anybody that uses that platform, but our website is larkspurconservation.org.
Yes, and there's a ton of information on there just to learn more about natural burial. You can see actually the whole landscape of the area. It's a beautiful area, and just learn more there. So thank you so much for being here with me today, and just for we've never had a conversation like this on the podcast. And I think that it's one that is not only needed, but it allows us to really, I think, demystify something that could feel so foreign or fearful to people. And so I hope that this encourages those to just start thinking a little bit differently about how they wake up every day and how they choose to see the world, and of course to really dive into this beautiful opportunity of natural burial and what that means. And one of my childhood friends, Toulouse Schuyler, actually was buried out there earlier this year, and I know that you did her incredible ceremony, and it's so, of course she was buried in that way, because that's just how she lived life and who she was. And it's just been amazing to not only see your journey of it, but then to know someone who actually got to, experience that, and then to see that reflected back to her family and friends was amazing. So thank you so much for everything that you do.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you for inviting me to share with everyone.